You've been lied to your entire life about black nobility. While your textbook showed you pale kings sipping tea in castles, our ancestors were commanding armies, building empires, and defining European civilization itself. This isn't forgotten history. This is stolen history. Excellence deliberately erased. Achievements transferred to others. Royal bloodlines whitewashed from existence. What I'm about to show you will shatter everything you thought you knew about European power. For hundreds of years, African-descended kings, dukes, generals, and scholars dominated the continent's most elite circles. They weren't anomalies or curiosities. They were the apex of European society, and their stories have been systematically buried. Today, we're taking back what belongs to us. Every black child deserves to know they descend from those who didn't just survive in Europe. They conquered it through pure brilliance. You think Bridgerton was fiction? You think seeing black people in European courts was just Hollywood fantasy? Think again. The real history is so much more incredible than any TV show could ever imagine. But this erasure wasn't accidental. It was calculated cultural warfare. Here's their playbook. Renaissance artists painted over black features in portraits. Russian historians rewrote family trees to remove African ancestry. Universities deleted black scholars from academic records. Museums buried paintings showing African nobility. This coordination spans centuries and countries. The goal? Make us forget our greatness while accepting lies about our capabilities. Convince us we were always servants, never masters. Ensure we'd never realize we already belonged at the top. The psychological damage was devastating and intentional. But here's what they couldn't destroy: the truth itself. By the way, if you're enjoying the content so far and want to see more untold black stories, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We need each and every one of you to help spread the message. Now, back to the video. Meet Abram Petrovich Ganibal, living proof of African genius at the highest levels. Kidnapped from Africa as a child, most stories like this end in tragedy. Abram rewrote the script entirely. This brilliant boy caught Tsar Peter the Great's attention, not as entertainment, but as raw intellectual power that couldn't be ignored. Peter saw genius where others saw property. The most powerful man in Russia chose this African child not just to free, but to raise his family. While millions of Africans suffered in bondage, Abram studied military engineering in Paris, mastered mathematics, and learned statecraft. He returned to Russia not as a former slave, but as one of the empire's most trusted generals. He designed fortresses that still stand today. The Tsar granted him nobility, earned through excellence, not charity. But Abram's greatest achievement was his bloodline. His great-grandson, Alexander Pushkin, became Russia's most celebrated poet. Every Russian literature class studies words flowing from African royal blood. When people quote Pushkin, they're celebrating the descendant of African brilliance. Russia's greatest cultural treasure springs from kidnapped African royalty. Let that reshape your understanding of who belongs where. But Russian historians couldn't stomach this reality. As nationalism intensified, they systematically downplayed Ganibal's African heritage. Official documents began emphasizing his exotic origins rather than his African identity. Later portraits depicted him with ambiguous features. Family descendants felt pressure to minimize their African connections. They attempted to divorce Pushkin from his African roots, claiming Russia's literary giant as purely Slavic. The strategy was simple. Simple errant while erasing the source. History has a way of preserving truth despite determined liars. But this erasure has ancient roots. Meet St. Maurice, the Black Knight Europeans worshipped for over a millennium. St. Maurice commanded the Theban Legion, elite Roman warriors from Egypt and Sudan. When ordered to massacre innocent Christians, he chose martyrdom over moral compromise. That decision transformed him into European Christianity's most venerated military saint. For over 1,000 years, the Holy Roman Empire claimed a black African as their patron saint. German cathedrals depicted Maurice in knight's armor. Swiss churches carved his image in stone. Austrian nobles commissioned paintings of him, blessing their battles. European Christianity literally looked to African leadership for spiritual guidance. When they prayed for military victory, they called on our ancestor. The foundation of European religious authority rested on African moral courage. Walk into ancient European churches today, and Maurice still watches over congregations. Our ancestor, hidden in plain sight, sword raised in eternal protection of the faithful. But centuries of subtle racism gradually transformed Maurice's image. Early medieval art clearly showed his African features. As time passed, each generation of artists made him slightly lighter, more European in appearance. By the Renaissance, some depictions reduced him to merely exotic rather than obviously black. Church authorities permitted this slow-motion cultural theft. They watched our ancestors' identity fade brushstroke by brushstroke, generation by generation. This pattern continued into Renaissance Italy, where they tried erasing living black royalty. Meet Alessandro de' Medici, the African-descended duke commanding Renaissance Florence. While Leonardo painted and Michelangelo sculpted, Alessandro ruled Europe's cultural capital. Born into the Medici banking dynasty through an African mother, he inherited both wealth and the genetic brilliance that built empires. At 19, Alessandro controlled Florence, not just any city, but the birthplace of Renaissance innovation. For 5 years, he navigated Italy's deadliest political landscape, where miscalculation meant death. Yet he thrived, commissioning masterpieces from legendary artists with Europe's most dangerous powers. The Renaissance explosion Europeans celebrate? It flourished under African leadership. Every commissioned artwork, every cultural innovation, every political maneuver flowed through the mind of this young black duke. Alessandro didn't just participate in Renaissance glory, he directed it. Foreign ambassadors sought his counsel, Italian nobles competed for his favor, artists depended on his patronage for their immortal works. But jealous Italian nobles couldn't tolerate African excellence on their throne. In 1537, Alessandro's cousin Lorenzino assassinated him. The official motive was political rivalry, but the deeper truth was racial hatred. They murdered him because exceptional black leadership shattered their assumptions about natural hierarchy. Death wasn't enough for their racism. They immediately began cultural assassination, systematically lightening Alessandro's portraits in later reproductions. Museum curators buried paintings showing his true appearance. Art historians minimized his African heritage in scholarly writings. They killed the man, then killed his memory. Physical murder, followed by historical murder. But talent like Alessandro's leaves marks too deep for erasure. But African intellectual dominance extended far beyond politics. Anton Wilhelm Amo proved this by becoming the first African to earn a European doctorate in philosophy. Born in Ghana, brought to Europe as a child, Amo shattered every racist assumption about African mental capacity. While Europeans justified slavery by claiming black intellectual inferiority, this brother was earning Germany's highest academic honors. Amo didn't just survive in European universities, he excelled as a professor at Halle Jena, teaching German students about human consciousness, logic, and moral philosophy. Picture the irony, an African mind explaining to Europeans how thinking works. His doctoral dissertation on human consciousness influenced Enlightenment philosophy across the continent. His lectures on human dignity challenged slavery's intellectual foundations. European students learned from textbooks written by the very people their society claims couldn't learn. Eventually, disgusted by European hypocrisy, Amo returned to Africa. He refused to continue building the intellectual framework of a civilization that denied his people's humanity. That moral courage defined true African nobility, excellence paired with uncompromising principles. But European scholars committed intellectual theft on a massive scale. Amo's revolutionary ideas about human consciousness became foundational to Enlightenment philosophy. His concepts of human dignity shaped academic discourse for generations. Yet mysteriously, his name vanished from citations, while his ideas appeared in works by white philosophers who came after him. The pattern never changes. Absorb African brilliance, credit European thinkers, erase the original source. Modern human rights philosophy owes profound debts to this hidden African genius, but his name appears in almost no philosophy textbooks. Meet Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier de St. the definition of Renaissance excellence in one extraordinary life. Master swordsman, virtuoso composer, brilliant violinist, military commander, revolutionary leader. If Europeans valued it, St. George dominated it completely. Born in Guadeloupe to a French nobleman and Senegalese mother, Joseph became 18th century France's biggest cultural phenomenon. His sword skills earned him bodyguard duties for King Louis XV and the noble title of Chevalier. His musical genius made him conductor of Europe's premier orchestras. They called him the Black Mozart, but that undersells his impact. Beethoven studied his compositions. Queen Marie Antoinette attended his concerts in disguise. European high society competed for his attention, while young artists idolized his versatility. When the French Revolution promised liberty, equality, fraternity, St. George embraced it wholeheartedly. Revolutionary leaders appointed him colonel of Europe's first all-black regiment, the Legion St. George. African warriors fighting for freedom under African command in the heart of Europe. His secret mission extended beyond military service. Paris sent him to London as a covert operative, building anti-slavery networks while performing for British royalty. Assassins attacked him on London Stick to stop his abolitionist work, but this master swordsman fought them off and continued his mission. But even extraordinary talent couldn't overcome institutional racism. When St. George was proposed as director of the Paris Opera, France's highest cultural position, 3 opera singers wrote directly to Queen Marie Antoinette. Their honor could never allow them to submit to the orders of a mulatto. Consider the implications. This man had proven excellence in every field Europeans claimed to value: nobleman, musical genius, military commander, cultural icon. Yet when ultimate artistic authority was at stake, white mediocrity refused to accept black leadership. His operatic dreams collapsed not from lack of ability, but from racist gatekeeping at the highest levels. Even revolutionary France, advertising equal rights for all, maintained racial ceilings on black achievement.
Say it with me. We reject their sanitized version of history completely. The evidence is overwhelming. Across centuries and countries, in every field of human achievement, warfare, scholarship, politics, arts, governance, African excellence dominated European society. Not as exceptions or tokens, but as the standard of greatness. Russian generals, Italian dukes, German professors, French knights. Our ancestors didn't just participate in European civilization, they shaped it from positions of ultimate authority. Yet, every story follows identical patterns: extraordinary achievement, racist backlash, systematic erasure. They murdered our bodies when possible, then murdered our memories always. They stole our crowns and claimed them as their own. Their cultural warfare has failed. Today, we reclaim every stolen narrative. When they question our belonging in power, we remind them we've held these positions for centuries. When they doubt our capabilities, we point to ancestors who built their intellectual foundations. Every black child needs to understand they descend from royalty, not just survival. Your bloodline carries kings and queens, revolutionary leaders, and cultural architects. This royal heritage didn't begin recently. It spans generations of hidden excellence. This is just our first revelation. Hundreds more stories await discovery. African pharaohs, Moorish kings, black merchants who financed European exploration, queens who shaped royal courts across continents. We're not making history, we're reclaiming the history they stole. Subscribe because we're exposing every lie about our ancestors. Share this because every black person deserves their royal truth. Remember, you don't descend from slaves, you descend from kings.